Hey Matt, how are you today?
Doing great, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing good. Good to see you.
See
We'll
you.
give people a minute here to join. If you're on the live stream, comment for us. Let us know where you're joining us from, and we'll give just a minute here for some other folks to show up. Here with Matt Whitaker, founding principal of WMWA Associates, or no, WMWA Landscape Architects.
That's correct. Yeah.
I get that right?
That's right. That last A is associates.
That's the associates, right?
Yes.
Cool.
Try to just be the letters. We're going to work
If
our way
you just
down.
joined, give us a comment. Tell us where you're calling in from. We're going to give people just another second to get onto the stream here. So Matt, I guess you don't have a lot of people in your office, but you're still headed into the office right now?
Yeah, we're still going. We're small enough. We got plenty of space, and the rest of the building is pretty much emptied out. So we've had it to ourselves.
Sounds good. All right, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my screen. Thanks for joining us here. We're talking with Matt Whitaker, landscape architect, and we're going to be talking about being grounded in place and how you can design in a way that is sensitive to the place in which you find yourself. And of course, from our perspective here at Reflection Writing, Arboretum Nature Center, we are really focused on native plant propagation. So we'll talk about using native plants in your planting plans, in your landscape architecture. And Matt is one of the leaders in that area, so we'll have a lot of great things to add. But I'll get started here and tell you a little bit about the City Nature Challenge. Let me actually, Matt, I'm going to mute you out. I'm getting a little bit of feedback.
Okay.
Looks like I got Studio Mayo that just joined. Welcome, guys. If you just joined the stream, comment, let us know where you're coming in from. And here we go. I'm going to switch back to this. Real quick before we get started, I wanted to let everybody know that we have just kicked off the City Nature Challenge. This is a global inventory of biodiversity, especially focused around urban areas. And it started at midnight or middle of last night and runs until Monday night at 11:59 p.m. So there's a 3-day period in which we will, or 4 days really, where we'll be encouraging people to go out, open up iNaturalist, which is an app you can find at iNaturalist.org or anywhere you get your iPhone or Android apps, and observe nature, see what you see around you. One of the gaps in our knowledge of biodiversity is around what's going on in cities. And as we are all increasingly urbanizing, that urban biodiversity is really important. And I know that's a trend in landscape architecture too. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The City Nature Challenge is organized on a global level by the California Academy of Sciences and the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. Locally here in the Chattanooga region, which we have defined as the 16-county region surrounding Hamilton County, it is organized by us here at Reflection Writing. A little bit about what we do. We have a native plant nursery that unfortunately is not open to the public right now, but we are selling plants online, and you can have a schedule a pickup or a delivery. So check us out, reflectionwriting.org/plants. We are also doing habitat restoration on our own property. In a lot of cases, that means starting with invasive plant removal and then seeing what grows up and what's still in the seed bank that is good, and then adding in from our own nursery over time. This is actually a photo here of a prothonotary warbler, which reproduces. They come and nest here in the summer, spring and summer. I've already seen my first one back actually about a week and a half ago. So it's really fun to see what comes back when you restore the native landscape with plants. And then from a wildlife conservation perspective, mostly what we're involved with is the endangered American red wolf species survival plan. When any species is added to the Endangered Species Act and is listed, there is an SSP, or Species Survival Plan, that is written, and cooperators who want to be part of that can join. We have about 40, I think we're at 45 cooperators around the country that help breed the red wolf for eventual re-release back on the landscape and hopefully delisting off of the Endangered Species Act list. And then the final one here is nature-based education. We have kids out on the property all the time, from our forest kindergarten into our forest homeschool, and then on field trips. And so that's, if you come a normal time when we're not locked down for COVID-19, you would see a couple hundred kids out there on a day like today. Our founder was John Chambliss, one of the lawyers from the Chambliss law firm. And this is from a Nashville magazine where they're talking about how offbeat this guy was. He started buying property at the foot of Lookout, and he bought this old farm called Sunset Rock Farm. This was 1947 that this photo was taken, and you can actually see some, what I think is English ivy growing up there. This was a poorly farmed area. There was a ton of erosion. This is at a time period, I guess this would be right after things like privet were brought into the country. Kudzu, I think into the 30s, kudzu was recommended to be planted by the USDA to shore up areas where you had erosion. So there was all kinds of stuff that they planted on this property that we're still fighting today. But by the 50s and 60s, it was opened up to the public. This is actually a constructed pond. We have 2 ponds on the property, and basically the whole property was constructed. And so it is kind of it's both one of the original conservation acts in Chattanooga. This land was put together about the same time as the Ox brothers were putting together what is now the National Military Park. And this land was set aside from development and has been protected from development ever since. But it is very much a constructed landscape. Back in the 60s, this is 1969, it was not the kind of nature center and vibrant place that you see today, but it was more oriented towards cars pulling off of the highway and driving through to see this landscape. And they had this honor box where you would put $1 into the box. And then this is what we look like today, or pretty close. I think I actually took this one in the middle of summer last year. But anyways, this is the upper pond, and you can see the Humphreys house, the log cabin kind of back in the background, and then the view up towards Sunset Rock, which is the little rock kind of in the middle of the background up top. So it's a beautiful landscape. And this is actually a map of the north. This came from Matt, and he may want to speak to it at some point, but Matt's firm donated their time to create this for us. Garden Road is how you get to us, and Garden Road dead ends into our property, where you see on the north end, we have a boardwalk that you can walk on, a canoe launch, and then there's a whole network of trails as you move south, and all kinds of cool views and things to experience. So we hope soon enough, when we're open again, that you guys will come visit. Again, City Nature Challenge, go check out iNaturalist and participate with us. We'd love to have you. So with that, I don't want to take up too much of Matt's time. This is really Matt's show. So Matt, I'll unmute you and welcome. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me here. Excited to be here.
One more time, I've got Studio Mayo says they're here. Thanks for joining. Who else is with us today? Comment, let us know where you're dialing in from. We'd love to know who we have on the line here. And then I'm going to turn over, Matt, to your presentation if you're ready.
I'm ready.
All righty, there you go. It's all you.
All right. So this is what you get when you let me set my own presentation. It's kind of a mishmash of several things, and I'll probably go through it pretty quick because it's got several slides in it. And we can go back to any slides or come back to any topics once we get to a point where you all can submit questions. I think you can submit questions the whole time. And maybe I can answer some as I go.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead and submit your ideas, and if I see something, Matt, I'll stop you and put it up on the screen.
Great. So this presentation is an overview of a handful of our projects and some of the things that inspire it. one of the foundations of how we do things here and how we think about design is really cultural and natural inspiration, to tie the design to the place, to Chattanooga, Tennessee, to Charlottesville, Virginia, to Atlanta, Georgia, so that when you see that landscape, once it's created, you understand you're in a place and it doesn't feel like anywhere USA. Let's get over here. And so that's kind of an overarching theme. And then these three principles are principles that we use to also guide what we're doing. So design must be of place. I just talked about how we find a way of making it about a place. Design must be sustainable, and that's both economic and sustainable, or ecological. And then design must be collaborative. It's very important. Here is a Chattanooga, an overview of Chattanooga, the place where we design from most of the time, although we do have projects throughout Tennessee and a few in Georgia. A lot of our projects do center on Chattanooga. First project we're going to talk about is a kind of art piece, public art piece in downtown Chattanooga in our new Miller Park design. It's the kind of, you can't see my cursor, can you, Mark?
No, you have to kind of describe it.
Okay, so kind of in the middle of this photograph, those rock outcrops, those slopey rock things, I think is what one of the local newspapers in Chattanooga called it. We were asked to take that art piece on and design that. And we started with inspiration from this place. So this is downtown Chattanooga a long time ago, and that big hill that you see there is no longer there. That's Cameron Hill. That's where Blue Cross Blue Shield's headquarters are now. And they took the top of that off a good bit. But if you look back at Lookout Mountain beyond it, or just look at Lookout Mountain today, you can see there's some similarity in this kind of slow rise as you go north from the south, and then a drop off quickly at the river. That kind of landform is repeated in several places around Chattanooga and the region. Also, we used as an inspiration the layering of rocks that happen here, very obviously under the Hunter Museum on the river is probably the most obvious place to see that, where you have limestone and slate, and then if you go to as high as Lookout, you actually have a sandstone cap on top of there. And it's a very distinct geological formation that you find around here. Those rocks at Rock City that make it so famous are the sandstone that's left after erosion took place. And the other thing that we used as inspiration for this design was just the kind of view you get of mountains when you're looking in the distance as they crisscross each other. And one more, those rocks from Rock City or on Lookout Mountain, where you kind of walk amongst the different formations that tower above you. And then also kind of as inspiration, not really making the form, thinking about it in terms of how important those rocks and those formations are to Chattanooga, the popularity of rock climbing. And this is our concept drawing, where we have picked up that slope, although we have taken it and kind of formalized it. We don't want to try to recreate nature exactly. We want people to understand that this is man-made, man-inspired, inspired by nature and place, but linked to those things. And you can see the layers that we've built into there to pick up on that. And then you can kind of see in some of these images, maybe we've got one more, the crisscrossing of mountains. And then of course you can walk amongst these rocks like the rocks on Lookout Mountain. Here's the plan. And then here are photos of the finished artwork on the day that Miller Park opened. And we did end up with limestone pieces, and we used different finishes on the limestone to get some of that interest, and a sandstone cap inspired by that. This is all local sandstone. The limestone came from North Alabama. That's as close as we can get. Unfortunately, the great gray stone that you see around much of downtown Chattanooga that was used as a building material 100 years ago isn't readily available anymore as dimensional stone to build something. You can get it in gravel for your driveway. You can't get big blocks of stone anymore, which is what we would have liked to have used. That's another view of it. Fall view. and I'm just going to move fast through this. Mark, if you see a comment that you have that I should address, give me a shout because I'm mostly looking at this presentation. This is another project. This
real
is,
quick,
say that again, Mark.
Sorry, Matt. I just wanted to welcome, we got Mary in from St. Elmo, a couple people from St. Elmo, Hayden from Baton Rouge, and Janice from Philadelphia. So,
all right, shout out to St. Elmo. That's where I live now. I'm sure that's because of me we have a St. Elmo's joint.
I'm sure it is.
I said, probably not. So this is the Tennessee Aquarium Conservation Institute out on the Tennessee River, close to Williams Island. And this was really the first big commercial project that I got once I moved to Chattanooga. And we had to raise the entire building 4 feet to get it out of the floodplain. You can't build a building that can't be accessed by emergency vehicles in a flood. And so we used that to try to figure out how to make this seem a little more natural and not just a big blob raised 4 feet over everything. And we used river forms and the way rivers shape soil over time. It was very obvious when we saw the topography of this site. There were two different they're not quite mounds, but there were two kind of higher edges here and about here and this low point here. And those were where the bank of the river was about 1,000 years ago and about 2,000 years ago as the bank of the river has moved. It doesn't move so much anymore because we've kind of locked it down because we don't like that. But we took the island inspiration of the way islands were formed and formed this topography of the site so that you really don't notice that we have raised everything by 4 feet. It very gently slopes down to the north, so as you approach the building, it just rises up. You don't even realize we've changed the grade. But over here on the riverside, we went quickly. It's hard to see, but you go from the finished grade here at the building down to 4 feet lower really quickly to create a dramatic edge, and also recalled that riverbank edge on this riverside. And then we took the parking and the drive-in and kind of curved them around to relate to those forms. One of the things that we used for inspiration on this project, see if I can silence that. I am in my office. And I can't, it will just go away. There we go. Sorry about that. And that did not work.
Matt was saying before we got on that he wished there was a way to mute his phone, and apparently there's not. So give him just a second.
On this entire phone. There, it's gone. I'm the only one in the office, so there's no one else here to grab that. So back to the Aquarium Conservation Institute. They're primarily a research institute focused on biodiversity, both exploring and understanding the biodiversity in the southeast in the country, but also protecting it and preserving it. And we had this opportunity to think about all of those principles as we design the landscape. So one of the things we do is we treat all the stormwater there on site and get it back into the ground. But we also are planting everything, obviously, with native plants. But we wanted to go one step further and stick to native plants that were hypernative to the riverbank of the Tennessee River or other waterways in this region. And this is showing the two floristic studies that we use to draw plants from. If the plants were not on those lists, we didn't use them. And we did that not because we needed to, but because part of design and part of telling a story that people connect to is education and understanding and drawing out things that they usually miss, like where is that plant native to, or where would that plant be growing? It's things that people mostly don't think about. And so to enhance the importance of the design or the connection of the design to people who are visiting, but also the story of biodiversity, we stuck to those plants only in those two studies, which is the Middle Tennessee Hiawassee subwatershed, the floristic studies. They were the North Chickamauga Gorge and the Tennessee River Gorge were the two studies that we found. And here you go.
Hey, Matt.
Yep.
Got a question. How many species are on a list like that in that study?
I think we have, I don't have them listed here, but this one, as I recall, probably, this is the source of it. This is both of them. It's going to be probably 200 to 400 species, possibly more.
Okay, so you have plenty to choose from.
Say that again, Mark.
So you have plenty to choose from a design.
We have plenty to choose from, and when I set out to do that, I wasn't sure I was going to have the flexibility that I wanted, but it turns out I had plenty of flexibility. I was kind of amazed at the number of plants that were there that I thought would do well, look good, and also that would be relatively available. And we really had no problem finding most everything. Only a handful of things did we need to go to a local native plant nursery in Tennessee to get them, but everything else was readily available. And here's the planting plan for the back of the building and at the front of the building. This is the overall rendering, but we'll go back here for a minute. So there's a tremendous amount of diversity going on here. And this is where we're treating all the stormwater. It's coming off the building into this cistern, flowing into this basin, and then it flows into 2 large kind of bioretention areas. We also take the fish tank water where they raise fish inside. They waste a good bit of water when they're propagating those fish for restoration purposes. It used to go to the Moccasin Bend, and now if it is not medicated with anything to treat the fish, then it can go into this system. And so we built this capacity to handle that and take some of that water out of Moccasin Bend, but also to just continue to tell the story about water quality and using opportunities to clean it up. Here's the overall rendering, and you can kind of see that curve of the parking and the drive-in that relates to the island form. That bioretention area at the front entrance. We take the stormwater off the back and we bring it through the front. We collect a little bit more off the front that doesn't go into that cistern. And then you cross underneath a boardwalk that's taking you to the front door and then under the road. And we did that intentionally because I want people to think about, why am I crossing over water? So maybe they'll ask the question, if not out loud, in their own mind, and start to think about natural systems and how we typically in the past have handled them, putting them on in a grate pipe and getting rid of them, which causes a lot of problems, and why we don't do more things like this, which turns out to be a beautiful landscape. I love this project for a variety of reasons, but it is a great project to expand the way engineers and other designers think about handling stormwater. We had to deal with the stormwater, that cost money. We had to plant it, that cost money. And in this case, we're doing both of those things with the same with the same program. So we're saving money in essence because we combine those things and we get that work out of the landscape instead of a set of pipes and a landscape. Here's one of the posters we did kind of explaining what I just went through and how all of that works. There's a little weir here, using local stone again. Using materials that come from a place is not limited and should not be limited to just plants. It should be other materials. They're both sustainable, but also it's again telling that story of this place, the materials that belong here. I'm saying that you shouldn't sometimes get materials from somewhere else. Granite from North Georgia or even granite from Vermont is a beautiful material, and there are times when it's appropriate. But you should always be thinking about how you can strengthen your design with the materials that are here and how you can use them differently. And we'll see a little bit of that at the end of this presentation.
So is the main advantage there just the fact that it doesn't have to be transported?
That is one of the, that's the kind of, if you're thinking about LEED and that sustainability, it's that it doesn't have to be transported very far. And natural stone is also sustainable because it is much more durable than concrete and concrete pavers. This material is essentially going to outlast all of us. It'll outlast this building. The paving that we used in the front is laid without mortar or mortar joints. So if you needed to come through and dig that all up and put in a new utility for some reason, you could pick all that stone up, set it to the side, and then put it all back in place. And it's much cheaper than cutting and patching concrete, which would look awful, or tearing out the concrete and totally repaving it so it would look good again. And it's essentially, 100, 200-year material. It's forever.
Very cool.
And to complete that chain, so the water goes under this boardwalk and under this bridge. It goes into a little bit of created wetland that we had here to offset some of the fill. We did take this existing wetland and pull it over closer to the road, set the slope on this bank in one place to 4-to-1 instead of 3-to-1, so that we can have an amphitheater possibly for education over the wetland eventually. And then it goes to a stream that eventually makes it into the river. This is our plant list, and this includes things that we planted as well as the things that we've now identified on site that were native there that came from the topsoil. Another very sustainable aspect of this project is we had the room, we set aside all of the topsoil and used that material back on the site. And so not only did we save money, also we saved a lot of hauling, because you have to pay for the topsoil to be hauled away and then pay for new topsoil to come back. But also, that's a lot of fuel that you spend. And the kind of added benefit is because there were so many native species in the seed bank in this soil, those species are now in our site. And we didn't have to pay for them. And we know those species are native to this place on the river. So again, you can hear the enthusiasm in my voice. It's because it's such a great story, and it helps people think about plants and the landscape and the places we live, and how you get to sustainability by saving money. It's another exciting aspect as well. So it's just a great part of the story and education. Couple more photos, I think, of that project. Here's the walls. It's really difficult to get the mason to understand what I wanted. I wanted the walls to look like the layers of the quarry when it's been blasted. So it really relates to that local formation. Most people are often stuck on it looking perfect, like brick. It doesn't make sense to take a material and try to turn it into another material. If you want brick, use brick. If you want stone, let it look like stone. So we took some efforts, but we got the walls to look like that. And then interestingly, I heard a story that the guides for the aquarium were explaining to people that we built it this way to give habitat for different species, spiders, salamanders in the wall, which is a great story, but we didn't really intend that. And then here's that sandstone, same material, used as a paving in our boardwalk. Some education signs that we put in the back to explain what we were doing with the stormwater and the importance of rain gardens. It's one of my favorite details. This is the bridge, in quotation marks, between the two bioretention areas. It's just big slabs of stone that are about 14 inches deep. And it allows you, it's essentially stepping stones, really high stepping stones, but it allows the water to move under you without paying for the complexity of another boardwalk and the maintenance that might eventually come with that. And it just, again, connects people to why am I walking over this? What's happening around me? And then
I'll add in there, because I've actually seen this in person a couple times. One time when it was raining and there was water moving below your feet as you walked across that. And this is one of my favorite features of that particular garden. Very cool design here.
And it wasn't a particularly complex or expensive detail. It just required, thought and time to work it out. And it essentially saved money. It's much cheaper than trying to build another boardwalk. And then just at the end, maybe out of order, but I think it helps to sometimes shock you. This is what the site looked like. It was a fescue field, and the edge of the river's kind of obscured with about half invasive materials that we cleared out and we continue to manage. This is the view north, so the institution is behind me, and this is the meadow that's there now in front of us. A few more photos of grasses. This is one of my favorite hollies. This is Ilex decidua. The leaves fall away. They have no thorns. It's a holly, but they have no thorns. The leaves go away in the winter, but it's covered with these red berries. In fact, if you're buying branches at Publix in the winter to decorate your home, it's probably this or another native holly holly species that you're buying. I just love to plant them, and then you don't have to go to Publix. You can just go out in your yard and cut them. This is that same view looking north, the river. We had a lot of native locusts that are coming in that we're having to manage a bit anyway because they're a little bit too aggressive. They are native, but we've cleared out the invasives in there. In the meadow, again, simple things like these mown paths in a straight line extend the design into the meadow and invite people, but that's a very cheap detail. In fact, I mowed that myself. It was really cheap.
Can you talk a little bit, Matt, about I think there's a misconception that planting with natives means you're going to end up with this kind of messy landscape. And I think this design, for me, is what really solidified that doesn't have to be the case.
It doesn't have to be the case. And then maintenance is part of that. This is a wilder planting. You don't have to do it so wild. But I was really building on that story of diversity. And those species, if we were saying hyper local, how many species, I'm going to go fast, we could get into this landscape. We weren't limited at all, really. So this is a wilder landscape, but you don't have to do that. I constantly talk to people about the fact that you can use a native plant, ground cover, as a single species for your more modern or simpler or easier to maintain design, and it does all the work of the native plant if it's in a line, if it's pruned into a hedge, and because there are certain aesthetics for buildings or people who do not want this. This has its place, but this is not the only option with native planting.
Thanks for the clarification there from Studio Mayo.
Yes, thank you. So the next project is really a planning project. Planners originally were landscape architects until they kind of separated that off into its own profession. But landscape architects still do a lot of planning in this country, and it is a significant part of our practice here. And this is a 2016 master plan that we did for the downtown kind of waterfront that we called the Ramble, also the Art Promenade. You can kind of see in the middle of the screen there's this long arrow that says the Ramble. We were thinking about how you connect the Bluffview Arts District all the way down to the Aquarium, really on the other side to the Chattanooga Green, and create, if you're familiar with La Rambla in Barcelona, a kind of destination in the pedestrian route between all of those things in itself, because we have this concentration of destinations. At the Walnut Street Bridge, there, right under the label for the Ramble, that crossing between the Ramble and the bridge coming from the north is the most pedestrian visited place in the city of Chattanooga. So this was a Lyndhurst-funded, River City-led project to study how to improve that district and create a destination in that path itself. And again, we started with thinking about this place. There's the outline of the Ramble district right there, and what it had been. There is those bluffs below the Hunter Museum. There's no Hunter Museum at that point. But those things to help inspire us. The La Rambla was an important inspiration, and it interested us that it both meant boulevard common thread, but it also could mean a water course. And because we are on the river as a water course and this common thread of a boulevard we were trying to create, that excited us. So we started to think about this as a watershed. And so that lower slide thinks about the watershed of the Ramble and all of the feeder streets, in this case, streets bringing pedestrians and cars down there to park, feeding into that as tributaries, feeding to this resource or watershed of downtown Chattanooga. And then the upper part of the slide talks about the three kind of common elements in this place that make it so popular to visit. And therefore, the three elements that we were going to use in our design to inspire the design and planning moves that we made: art, history, and then the civic. A couple of photographs. At Johnson Memorial is a piece that came along after we finished that project. looking for a place to locate the memorial, and it turned out to be on part of the Ramble. And as we were advancing the design, we'll have some of that of the plaza at the end of Walnut Street. This is going on the plaza. Here is the ultimate plan that we presented. And it's just thinking about, one, just getting more trees in there. We also divided into 3 distinct areas. The bluff, and a lot of this has to do with topography, but plants follow topography. Geography, stone follows that topography. You only get sandstone on the top of Lookout Mountain. You don't get it down in the valley here. It's limestone. All of those pieces and all of those threads, I like to think about landscape design as being the weaving of a narrative, but also the weaving of a quilt. And the narrative and the threads of that quilt are the stories that you're bringing together and bringing them together in this logical final quilt or product or story. But there's lots of different threads that come together to make that. Here is the bluff view side. Let me go quick. How are we doing on time, Mark? We're doing fine. I want to make sure you have time for questions.
Yeah, we're fine. 12:40. Hey, Matt, one question on this plan real quick. I've seen a couple elements of this, as you released them, and I'm just curious what's the status on this in terms of it actually being accepted or built, or is this more of a guiding sort of vision for all of these different projects that then have to be funded?
It's a guide, and some of these things are moving forward. There's a new project that's happening downtown for the city that's currently under plan, a master plan that's being worked on right now for actually a larger region, and it's a bigger study area that will incorporate, I think, a lot of what we did here, but expand it out into the rest of downtown all the way to 4th Street. There are elements of this that have been built. The street in front of the Edwin, the plaza has been bid, and it is currently making its way through the city to award the contract, and construction of that is going to start this summer. The Scramble, this was the art stair promenade. The River City held a competition, and they awarded this to a landscape architect out of Vermont who has designed it, and this is actually now closed off and under construction. Those are the kind of 3 big pieces that have happened so far. And I suspect that some of this will change, but also some of what comes out of the new master plan will reinforce the need to do some of the things that we identified here. Hunter Museum, this was the most complex. They have a hard time helping people figure out where to go when they arrive over here, and the front door is here. And then you have all of this real estate, and we've created some more real estate because, as planners, we can do that, but we put the road on a dike and narrowed it down to 2 lanes and parking. So we got some space back there. You have all this space that's unused. It's a challenge because there's such a great slope, but we, with some studies, think that you can get from the top down to the bottom in a straight line on an accessible route, which would be great for bikers, but also for pedestrians. You still have stairs to move up as you need to if you want to go faster, but this would be a great new route to add. And then we flattened out areas with stone walls, again, using that regional sandstone, and created in our mind what were outdoor galleries that could be adopted by different sponsors and have rotating artwork or permanent artwork that build on what's happening here. But also, you can kind of see it. There's an alley of trees in a straight line, and a straight line of pavers moving moving in this direction to kind of pull people this way and say, move this way. There's something this way that's happening. So this took a lot of thought to try to figure out how you kind of unify this with 3 distinctly different buildings, really tough topography. We also had UDA out of Pittsburgh on our team who did a study looking at the different vacant lots and what kind of infill buildings could go in there and what kind of uses might make sense, how much parking you could provide in those facilities. Some of these took up parking. And all of this is speculative. I don't think any of them have really moved forward yet, although a couple of them came very close. And I know River City is still continuing to try to promote infill on some of these lots. A few different images. This was really saying, this is such a important civic part of Chattanooga, this plaza. And what if we took cars out of this space sometime? We leave it so you can still drop people off there and access it when you need to, bring in buses, but it could be a public plaza at other times. This is showing kind of a market. And then we also showed how other things would fit in it. Here's the ice rink. The size of ice rink that's at Rockefeller Center fits in there beautifully. This is a market, a concert, big air competition. So this is a great space, and it's really at the heart of the city and the heart of our kind of civic rebirth as Chattanoogans. And it seems like the space was begging for some new uses. This is the plaza that I was just talking about up at Walnut Street. Ed Johnson is happening right here. This piece has been built, and the rest of this is now the bid is the bids are back. It hasn't been officially awarded yet, but the city is working on that contract right now, and construction will start.
So Matt, we can't see your cursor. Where's the Ed Johnson part going to be?
It's on the left side.
Okay, so right at the foot of the bridge.
Right at the foot of the bridge, yep. Kind of behind where the girl's sitting looking at her phone.
Okay, so there's a dog sculpture that's there right now. Is that the spot?
Yep, and he's moving. He's moving to the other side, on the right side of the bridge. So it's actually better for you to high five or high four.
Yeah, just not anytime soon.
It's what?
Just don't do that anytime soon.
No. But it's going to be in a better place, actually work better with the way traffic flows. And this is, a photograph of what it looked like when we were working on the master plan. The hotel was already kind of in the plan when we were working on the master plan. It hadn't been finalized. This is our vision of what the street would look like. We knew what the hotel was going to look like at that point. And then this is the street built. Another little project that came out of that, the glass bridge, Holmberg Bridge that goes over between this space and the Hunter Museum. Everybody loved it, but the glass was almost always broken. And no matter what kind of research the city did, I really don't think the bridge was designed to be glass. If you look at the old drawings, it had a couple of options of concrete or boardwalk, wood boardwalk. And I think they decided at the last minute to make it glass. And I don't think maybe the way it was put together was ideal for glass. And that's why they couldn't get it to not break. So we took that on, and it's very important in my mind that it was translucent, that it was lit creatively, that it still had this bit of edginess to it. So we proposed a stainless steel grate that had kind of a roughened material on some of them, and that so it's not slippery, and that we layer that in a wave pattern to bring some more dynamism to this piece. And here it is completed now. Kind of see the waves in this photograph. The city is in the process of working with the contractor. This has already been awarded, and it's under kind of planning right now. The design has been done, but they're trying to plan the approach on the construction. But we are going to light all of this from above underneath this handrail, so that it will once again glow at night, reflecting off of the stainless steel. Once you took the glass out, the glow kind of went away. This last project I think we're going to talk about is Patton Parkway. It's under construction right now. This is the one I was talking about a little bit earlier about using material in a little different way. This is the same sandstone we've used on several projects, but we are sawing the sides of it and sandblasting it, so it's a much more tight or formal looking feel to it. Which most of the time the sandstone is used in a more rustic manner, like you've seen on some of these other projects. And I wanted to demonstrate the opposite of that you can use it in a more urban, formal plaza way, that we still have some of that character and roughness of it, but also there's some like cleaned up edges to it, so it doesn't have to be rustic. This is what it looks like right now. Well, this is what it looked like last year. Right now it's under construction. We might have time to go look at it. One of the inspirations that we had for this project, again with the history, was the fact that this was the market for the city. There was a building in the middle of the park, or in Patton Parkway, that served as a market. Then it served as a city hall. Then it was a market again. It was eventually torn down. It's a photograph of it. And we built around that inspiration of a market, thinking about the architecture of markets around the world, of these columns and canopy, and even thinking about, this is again La Rambla, same kind of thing, only it's outdoor, and how we might use that. It's another inspiration. We use this for the paving, which we'll see in a second. We're thinking about leaves from the canopy that we created, how they dot themselves in the colors in the fall on the ground. Couple of those paving studies of how we might treat that. And then this is the final plan. So the trees really create our columns. I was very adamant that the trees had to be in a regular planting, so that you did feel like the architecture. They're trees that will have a high canopy with strong trunks. Again, build on that, and the canopy of this space will completely close eventually. We have soil cells underneath all of these, allowing the volume of soil so that we can get big trees. You can kind of see here then, so we took that paving inspiration and settled on this one, which is a very abstract way of treating it, but we have 3 different paver colors, but they kind of speckle from one to the next, and then back to the other one. So the middle is its own stripe, and then another piece in between the pedestrian areas, and then purely pedestrian has another color. Here's our final renderings of that space, which is under construction right now.
What kind of street trees did you pick for that?
We have swamp white oak, which is one of my favorites, a native, but it is very tolerant of urban conditions. I first saw it growing in DC in Meridian Hill Park, and was surprised to find out what it was. And then when I came back down to Chattanooga to practice, I started seeing it on the banks of the river here. So it's a native tree, native to right here in Tennessee, but it's also incredibly tolerant of urban conditions. That's the inside tree. The outside tree is a sweet gum, and it's a cultivar. Sweet gums can be problematic with their kind of seed pods, the gum balls. But there are a number of cultivars out there that don't produce gum balls. They're sterile. This is one of those, called Happy Days. One word with Z's in it. But it's a great tree because of the fall colors. It's probably as bright red fall colors you can get on a tree. But again, it's native. And then that's the end of my kind of presentation. Maybe we should focus on questions for a minute. Maybe if we run out of questions, I have a few kind of planting critique slides that we could look at. I spend a lot of time talking to people about landscape architecture and that it is not just planting. But then ironically, I spend a lot of time talking about planting design because a lot of landscape architects aren't really doing planting design. They're picking from the same set of plants that they're comfortable with, and they use them everywhere, and they look like that's what you did. Doesn't look like a design. It looks like that's what you've done. The profession as a whole is struggling with staying connected to plants, and more landscape architects who are coming out of school and I'm interacting with don't really know plants, and it takes an understanding. Someone asked me recently, how do I get to understand plants the way that you do? Because they propose plants and I'll say no to half of them. And you have to pay attention to plants. You have to plant them. You have to see what they do, see which ones die. And so you do that both in your projects, but I also do that at my house. I plant a diversity of plants, almost all coming from Reflection Writings greenhouses. It's a plug for Mark. And one of the great things about there is they're very, well, you can get some plants there that you can't get anywhere else, natives that are hard to find because they're kind of rare or harder to grow. And so I have a really diverse backyard and front yard starting. But I'm still sticking with some themes. So my front yard has, I guess I have 6 or 7 different phlox. I'm trying to get to maybe 10 different species. So it's going to be a complete phlox garden in the front. Just to say, what if?
That's cool.
You don't have to. Yeah, you don't have to plant plants as native plants. You can have themes. You can design. That's planting design, where you take the plants and you try to make people ask questions, or just create something that's interesting for you to observe yourself in your garden as it grows for the next 10, 20 years.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing. I've got a question here from Marion Martin. What type of trees are planted at Miller Park? She was asking.
What type of trees are planted at Miller Park? It's a variety of trees that we selected for Miller Park. All native. There's red buds. There's some of those same oaks, the swamp white oaks. There's Quercus lyrata, which is another native that is very tolerant of urban soils. A lot of the urban trees that are used are trees that grow in wetlands, because urban soils have low oxygen, wetlands have low oxygen, and so there's a lot of overlap. So the swamp white oak, lyrata, is a swamp tree. It actually leaves out late. If you go through right now and drive through MLK, you'll notice that there's several trees that don't look like they have any leaves on them, or just are barely starting to leaf out. That's Quercus lyrata. It waits because you have spring floods in the spring. They grow in the wetlands. And if they put their leaves out and they get covered up with water, then they could die. So it holds and it puts its leaves out a little bit later than other trees and adapted to those kinds of conditions. We also have tulip poplars. We have some smaller, but a plant I love, witch hazel. It's impossible to beat that tree. Large shrub, small tree, large shrub. What else do we have down there? I think that covers the majority of it.
Here's another one from Daniel Heckman. Any thoughts about graffiti or ADA accessibility?
In terms of ADA accessibility, all of the places that we've looked at have to be accessible. And so all of the materials, even the stone at the aquarium, meet those requirements. And it comes down to a detail for how they are put in so that they stay pretty flat, but also just good installers to make sure that they have enough change, that they don't have anything more than a 1/4 inch change. That's where you start to fail to meet the requirements. But typically with the natural cleft, which is stone at the aquarium, you don't have enough variation to fail, and then you just got to make sure you put it down. And you have to make some adjustments to it occasionally. But because it isn't mortared down, you can pull it up, put some more stone dust under it, compact it back into place. Relatively easy to fix it if anything settles out. And we did have a few places where the material underneath settled out, and they had to go back and fix it. The brick pavers that are going into both Patton Parkway and Walnut Street, they are pedestrian materials. And again, that comes down to the installation. Walnut Street has 10 inches of aggregate compacted to 100% compaction before we started putting those pavers down. And we spent a lot of time checking the quality of compaction and the quality of installation to make sure that we were going to have a flush paving surface when it was all put together for both cars. They had to be pretty tough to stand all that traffic, but also for pedestrians. Graffiti, we haven't had a lot of problem with graffiti so far. There have been some problems with skateboarders in Miller Park, but the rough edge of that sandstone is not very friendly. It's so sharp, it's not friendly to skateboards. So my theory has been that if you skateboard on it and you run down it a couple times, you're not going to like what it does to your skateboard. It's not like granite, which usually has a softer edge, or it wears down to that softer edge. It's more brittle, so it's going to get a pretty sharp edge. It's a little more dangerous for people, but you got to learn to be safe. A little danger is good for us.
So we actually got another great question from Marion and your compaction comment too. How do trees in a planting like this, in a design like this, how do they get enough water when they're basically surrounded by cement? I know you mentioned creating places for the roots to go in Patton Parkway.
Yeah, so both Patton Parkway and Miller Park have a network of soil cells below grade, which are, in the simplest terms, 3 milk crates stacked up on top of each other to get to the depth, and then side by side, lots of milk crates built in there together. And then you put the soil in there and it's not compacted. The milk crates, when they're all put together and with a decent amount of thickness over, are strong enough to hold up an 18-wheeler. And then the irrigation lines run and connect all that soil together. Trees need soil volume to get big. You go around and you look at trees that are in tree pits that might have been there. They look like they've been there maybe 3 or 4 years. They may have been there 20 years. They can't get enough soil volume that's uncompacted to grow, and they're just kind of creeping along. So that's why we do the soil cells, but it also allows, by connecting them, the ability to irrigate all of that, and it's all irrigated underground so that we're making sure that they get enough water. There really are not, because of the need for the durability of the paving section above those cells, we're not really getting any surface water into them. They're being irrigated. A little bit goes in right at the tree. Actually, on Patton Parkway, we're taking some of the stormwater from the surface into those soil cells and getting some stormwater credit for it as well. That's one of the benefits of soil cells. You can leave some space on top, actually store some stormwater in there, but it also waters those trees.
You actually asked the questions I was about to ask, because when I was up at the Patton group, which kind of looks up down onto Patton Parkway, and I noticed the cells going in. I actually thought it was a stormwater intervention, but it sounds like it was both.
It was both. The product that we used a different product in Miller Park than we're using in Patton Parkway, and they're both meant for this. But the product in Patton Parkway was originally built as stormwater storage. And so we're giving both a try. I think the general consensus is going to be that the product in Patton Parkway was easier to work with. But we're not finished yet, okay. So we'll have to see. I think also performance over the long term is going to be something we want to pay attention to. But it does both very well. There's a study out there that says we took all of the urban soils in cities and we simply decompacted them. So if you imagine all the foot traffic and car traffic over those plant beds, there's a lot of car traffic over planted beds, that we could store most of the rain that falls in the city. And so just by having uncompacted soil, we store a lot more water. And of course, the trees need that uncompacted soil to really grow and be healthy.
How about the trees along the riverfront? Same deal?
The trees along the Miller Park is the first installation of soil cells in the city. The trees along the riverfront are the older ones. They have irrigation, but they're probably in fairly compacted kind of boxes, because you need to compact the soil to at least 95%, or the gravel, to hold the paving up so the paving doesn't settle and crack. And so what you end up with then is a really essentially soil or gravel that acts like concrete when it's compacted to that density. A tree root can kind of push into the soil at about until 80% compaction. At 80% compaction, it can't push in there. It can't push anymore. And so it just becomes like being in a planter. If you've ever taken a plant out of a pot where it's completely root bound and surrounded, it will take advantage of every bit of space in there, and then it really stops growing. Some plants tolerate it better than others. Some start to really decline when they get to that root bound. Some can tolerate it and do better.
Okay. Well, Matt, thanks so much for joining us here on this live stream with Reflection Writing. We're going live with a bunch of different things right now because, as I mentioned when we started, we are close to the public right now, and we didn't want to just go completely off the radar. So it's great to see some people's faces and say hello and get these questions. Thanks everybody who joined. If you're on YouTube, go to wherever it says subscribe to our channel. If you're on Facebook, you're probably already following us on Facebook, but click if you're not. And one more time, go to reflectionwriting.org/plants to order your native plants. If you live in Chattanooga, if you don't live in Chattanooga, go find your closest nature center, native plant nursery, etc., and buy plants from them instead. And thanks. I didn't mention this at the outset, but Matt Whitaker, being a leader in landscape architecture practice here in Chattanooga, is a leader on our board at Reflection Writing, and we really appreciate you and all the work that you and your firm offer us. So thanks again, and you guys tune in. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, everybody.
See you, everybody.